I'm a 30-year-old woman named Emily, and for most of my life, I've been the steady one in the family. My sister Rachel, who's 33, is the opposite. Loud, confident, and somehow always in the spotlight, even when she hasn't earned it. We both work for our father's mid-sized logistics company. I run operations, and Rachel handles client relations, though anyone looking in from the outside would think she built the entire business by herself. Rachel thrives on presentation, perfect outfits, hand gestures, that confident tone that makes people think she knows everything. I stick to spreadsheets, vendor calls, and making sure things actually work. When shipments go out on time, it's because of my planning. When a client renews, it's usually because of my follow-ups. But when someone gives credit, it somehow lands in Rachel's lap. Over the years, I let it happen. I thought keeping the peace was better than fighting for recognition. Rachel loved telling stories at family gatherings about how she closed deals single-handedly, even when I had done the legwork. Our parents never noticed the difference. My mom would smile proudly and call Rachel such a natural leader, while my dad nodded, saying confidence was half the battle in business. Meanwhile, I handled payroll issues, vendor delays, and the quiet fires no one else saw. Rachel built her reputation carefully. She posted company photos on social media, always front and center, and exaggerated results just enough to sound impressive. When relatives repeated her stories, I stayed quiet. Correcting her would only make me look petty. That became my routine. Swallow the frustration, let her bask in the glow, and move on. Then came the dinner that changed everything. One of our father's business acquaintances approached Rachel and congratulated her for a logistics proposal I had written. Rachel smiled and said, "Emily's great with details, but I make things happen." Everyone laughed like it was harmless, but I caught the smirk that followed. That was the moment I realized she wasn't clueless. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every compliment she took from my work made her look bigger and me smaller. That night, I thought back to all the little things I'd ignored. When Rachel redecorated my apartment while I was away, she posted pictures online with captions about finally giving her sister a sense of style. When she joked in front of friends that my boyfriend Luke learned confidence from her, I laughed it off. Luke didn't. Over dinner one night, he said quietly that I'd trained Rachel to believe she could rewrite any story and I'd let her. He wasn't wrong. I started seeing patterns everywhere. The way Rachel spoke in absolutes, how she made every shared success sound like her solo performance. It wasn't competition anymore, it was control. A few weeks later, my father announced a 25th anniversary company gala. He said it would be Rachel's project, her chance to show what she can do. She clapped her hands like a child who'd just won a prize. Everyone else cheered. I just nodded. Rachel threw herself into it immediately, calling decorators, planners, and photographers. She treated it like her personal brand launch, not a company milestone. When our father asked me to help a little in the background, I agreed. But this time I meant it literally. No fixing, no saving, no stepping in to cover her chaos. I handled logistics quietly and watched as she overbooked vendors, bragged online, and promised things she couldn't organize. For once, I didn't step in to rescue her. I wanted to see what happened when her performance met reality. By the time the gala plans were in motion, I had stopped being the quiet helper. I became the observer, calm, detached, and ready. Rachel still thought I was in her shadow. She didn't notice I'd stepped out of it already. The gala became Rachel's stage long before it even began. She hired a decorator who specialized in luxury weddings, brought in a photographer weeks early for planning content, and treated every meeting like a press event. Every day there were new updates on her feed, floral arrangements, gold lettering, champagne tastings, all stamped with her favorite phrase, "making it happen." At work, she barely touched the actual logistics. Vendors called me for confirmations, invoices, delivery schedules, and technical setups. I answered without reminding her whose job it was. Letting her run the show meant stepping back completely, even when it made no sense to watch her dig deeper. A week before the event, I noticed the catering deposit hadn't been processed. When I asked accounting, they said Rachel never submitted the payment. I sent her the reminder through our shared system and left it there. She ignored it. 2 days later, the caterer canceled. The morning of the gala, Rachel showed up at the venue wearing a designer jumpsuit and holding a clipboard like a celebrity host. When the coordinator told her there was no food coming, her face drained. She blamed the vendor, the payment system, even the weather. Our father was due to arrive in 2 hours, and guests were already calling to confirm arrival times. I made a single call to an old acquaintance who ran a catering company nearby. Within 90 minutes, they had trays of food on their way, simple but good enough to save the evening. Rachel watched the delivery trucks pull in like she'd just seen a miracle. She clapped her hands, gathered everyone around, and announced that teamwork always wins. When the guests arrived, everything looked seamless. The decorations sparkled, the food came out on time, and Rachel was at the center of it all, thanking everyone for supporting her vision. She moved through the room like a host at a television premiere. Every compliment found its way to her. I stayed near the entrance, quietly handling small issues before they became visible. Later that night, as speeches began, our father toasted Rachel for her creativity. Cameras flashed. Rachel smiled, tilting her glass toward me as if to share the spotlight. I lifted mine politely. Then one of the caterers walked over, shook my hand, and thanked me for calling him personally to fix the crisis. He said it loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The room shifted just a little. My father looked at me, then back at Rachel, trying to make sense of it. After the event ended, guests and staff began packing up. Rachel cornered me in the storage area, her voice low but shaking. She accused me of trying to embarrass her. I told her she had wanted full control, and I gave it to her. For once, there was no argument left to win. The next morning, the company's social media page was flooded with photos and tags. Local outlets covered the gala, crediting operations manager Emily for coordination after speaking to vendors. Rachel reposted them at first, then quietly deleted her earlier solo success captions. At work, the air shifted. People who used to defer to Rachel began checking with me before sending approvals. Our father called me into his office and thanked me for stepping up when things went wrong. He didn't say much else, but it was the first time his words carried weight. Rachel tried to recover quickly. The day after the article went live, she sent out a company-wide email announcing new creative initiatives. She talked about future campaigns, community partnerships, and rebranding projects no one had asked for. It was her way of reasserting control, louder, flashier, and desperate. Meanwhile, I stayed late reviewing supplier feedback and adjusting budgets. The numbers told the real story. Her masterpiece had gone 40% over budget. I filed the report neatly and left it on our father's desk without commentary. By the end of the week, whispers had started among staff. They weren't cruel, just curious. People finally saw that the quiet one did more than fill out forms. Rachel noticed it too. She started showing up earlier, hovering near my office, asking for updates she used to ignore. One afternoon, she called for a meeting, trying to reestablish authority. She arrived with printed slides, eager to present her next big vision. Halfway through, our father interrupted her to ask about the catering oversight. Rachel stumbled through an excuse. He turned to me, and I explained the payment gap and the quick replacement I had arranged. No dramatics, just facts. The meeting ended early. For the first time, Rachel left the conference room without applause following her. That night, I walked past her office and saw her typing furiously on her laptop, eyes fixed on the screen. She was already planning the next project, one that would make everyone forget the last one. I didn't stop her. For years, she had treated image as armor, noise as proof, and applause as currency. I finally understood something she didn't. The more she needed to be seen, the easier it became to let her expose herself. The gala hadn't ruined her. It had only cracked the surface. What came next would decide how far the noise could echo before silence took over. Rachel came back to work the following week, acting like nothing had changed. Her voice carried across the hallway again, and she walked into meetings late but smiling, pretending the gala had been a complete triumph. The difference was subtle at first. People didn't lean forward as much when she spoke. Her laughter filled the air, but no one joined in the same way. Then our father announced his next big move. The company was doing well enough to consider opening a second branch in another city. He mentioned it during a meeting, still thinking of Rachel as his bold idea generator. Before anyone else could react, she volunteered to take full control of the expansion. She framed it as her chance to lead independently. Everyone looked at me, waiting for some kind of reaction. I just nodded. Rachel took it as approval and launched into a long speech about vision and growth. I quietly updated the internal systems that made every major approval route through my signature as operations manager. She could plan, pitch, and talk all she wanted, but without documentation, nothing would move forward. Rachel started calling clients and sending out proposals within days. Her messages were full of promises, delivery timelines, pricing structures, staffing plans, all made before she had the authority or resources to back them up. She sent unsigned agreements to people she barely knew, expecting others to handle the details. One of our longtime suppliers emailed me directly, confused about payment schedules Rachel had mentioned. I forwarded the message to her and left it at that. She replied hours later with an assurance that she'd sorted out. She didn't. I logged the exchange in a folder I'd quietly started, dates, messages, and every approval she skipped. At home, my mother called, saying she could sense tension between us. She thought Rachel just needed more support and suggested I help her find her footing again. I told her I would. I didn't. Within 2 weeks, the cracks began showing. Rachel's calendar was filled with back-to-back client meetings that produced no confirmed deals. Managers came to me privately to ask for clarification on conflicting instructions. Her charm still worked in small doses, but people were starting to notice the disorganization behind it. The near disaster came on a Thursday morning. Rachel had sent a quote to a high-value client, but she used outdated pricing and the wrong shipment schedule. If the deal went through, it would have cost the company tens of thousands. I caught it when the client called accounting for confirmation. I corrected the numbers, issued a new proposal, and ensured the system logged my update. I didn't mention it to anyone. That weekend, our father hosted a dinner for senior staff and key clients. Rachel used it as another stage, telling stories about how she'd saved a delicate client situation through negotiation. The same client she'd nearly lost sat across from her, smiling politely. I stayed quiet. My silence wasn't agreement anymore, it was observation. By the following week, small things started reaching our father's attention. He'd ask questions like why Rachel's new contracts didn't appear in the system, or why certain payments hadn't cleared. When Rachel offered explanations, his eyes lingered a little longer on me, waiting for confirmation. I always answered with documents, not opinions. Rachel didn't notice the shift. She was too busy announcing her next big win. She told everyone she'd secured a major partnership that would fast-track the second branch's success. She sent a company-wide email celebrating it before anything was signed. I checked the system. There was no record, no contracts, no correspondence, not even a draft. I made a few calls and confirmed the truth. The so-called partner had given her a verbal assurance only, contingent on financial reviews and market tests. It wasn't a deal, it was a conversation. Rachel had treated it like a headline. Instead of stepping in, I did something different. I made sure every file, email, and document related to the partnership showed who had approved what. I labeled each with the corresponding date and initials. If anything went wrong, there would be no confusion about responsibility. Meanwhile, Rachel ramped up her campaign. She booked photo sessions, printed flyers, and talked about leadership milestones. The staff followed orders but copied me on every message that required authorization. They'd learned where the actual approval came from. At one point, our father asked to see the partnership documents himself. Rachel promised she'd bring them the next day. That night, she stayed late in her office, lights still on when I left. She was probably trying to piece together something convincing. The next morning, she arrived early, cheerful and loud again. She carried a folder, set it on our father's desk, and gave a polished presentation about growth potential. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked a single question: where were the signatures? Rachel froze. She flipped through the pages, realizing there were none. She mumbled something about the partner being in the process of signing. Our father nodded slowly, said they'd revisit it after official confirmation, and ended the meeting. No argument, no lecture, just quiet dismissal. That night, Rachel went out to celebrate with her friends anyway, while our father allowed it only because he still hoped she could redeem herself for the sake of family unity. Photos appeared online of her toasting success. I stayed late at the office, reviewing documents one last time before locking the folder labeled Ego versus Reality into the cabinet. For years, Rachel had written the story, and I'd been part of the background. But this time, the ending was already in motion, and I didn't need to change a thing. Rachel turned her partnership story into a full campaign. Within days, she was featured on small business blogs as a young female leader expanding her family company nationwide. She reposted every article, hosted a dinner in her own honor, and even hired a photographer to capture her behind-the-scenes leadership moments. The staff went along with it because they always had, but this time they were careful. People were starting to copy me on emails before acting on her requests. The dinner was held at a local restaurant she'd rented for the night. The guests were company employees, clients, and a few local journalists she'd invited. Rachel stood at the front of the room, giving a speech about strategic expansion and innovation. She used words like secured and finalized over and over, even though the deal she bragged about didn't exist on paper. I didn't correct her. I sat near the back, watching her enjoy every compliment that came her way. A few days later, our father began rearranging staff assignments to support the new branch. He moved one of our logistics leads to Rachel's team and reallocated budget funds for her travel. She walked around the office like a celebrity manager, talking loudly about future hires and outreach plans. None of it had been formally approved, but no one challenged her. Then one of our key suppliers emailed me directly, asking when they would receive the initial deposit Rachel had promised for expanded warehouse space. The payment deadline had already passed. I forwarded the message to Rachel and left a note saying she should confirm the timeline. She replied quickly, claiming she was handling it. She didn't. 2 weeks later, the same supplier sent a polite reminder. I logged every exchange, the dates, the unanswered follow-ups, and her empty assurances. It became clear she wasn't managing anything. She was bluffing. Managers began to avoid sending her direct updates. Instead, they'd stop by my office to double-check things before proceeding. The confidence Rachel used to command was evaporating, replaced by a kind of polite hesitation. Even our father noticed the subtle shift in tone when her name came up. The situation boiled over when the supplier sent an official notice demanding payment within 72 hours, or the agreement would be voided. The email went to both Rachel and our father. That afternoon, he called a meeting. Everyone from senior staff to accounting was there. Rachel arrived in a rush, smiling too brightly, trying to steer the conversation before it started. She blamed confusion between departments, saying accounting had misfiled her paperwork. Our father asked for proof. She froze. The room fell quiet. I opened my folder and slid a printout of the full email chain across the table, timestamps, messages, and unanswered replies. The evidence spoke for itself. The supplier's demands were real. The payments never processed, and no official approval existed for any of her so-called expansion plans. It wasn't sabotage, it was self-inflicted. Rachel's expression shifted from confidence to panic. She accused me of setting her up. I didn't respond immediately. I simply told her everything in that folder was her own record. She'd built it herself. Our father didn't raise his voice. He just dismissed the meeting, telling everyone to return to their work. Rachel walked out without a word, and for the first time, no one followed her. By the next morning, she stopped attending meetings altogether. Her name disappeared from project calendars. Every department began routing updates through me, and I stayed late repairing what she'd broken, refunding partial deposits, renegotiating timelines, and contacting partners to reassure them the company was stable. It took weeks to untangle everything she'd promised. One vendor refused to continue working with us unless they dealt directly with me. Another asked if Rachel was still part of the leadership team. I told them she was on temporary leave, which wasn't far from the truth. Inside the company, the silence around her grew heavy. Her office door stayed closed, lights off most days. When she did come in, she'd leave quickly, avoiding eye contact. The confidence that used to fill every corner of the building had vanished completely. Clients who had once posted pictures with her now tagged the company page instead. Emails that used to go to her inbox started arriving in mine. It wasn't a planned takeover, it just happened naturally. People went where the work got done. Late one night, I finished compiling the final report for the quarter. The section titled Expansion Overview was nearly blank. Only a note remained: initiative withdrawn, pending review. I filed it, attached the documentation, and locked the drawer. Before leaving, I paused by her empty office. A single framed photo sat on her desk, the one from the gala, both of us smiling. I turned it face down and switched off the light. As I walked out, the company lobby felt unusually quiet. For years, Rachel's voice had filled every corner. Now the only sound was the hum of the vending machine and the clicking of my shoes on the tile. In the stillness, I realized something. Silence doesn't always mean defeat. Sometimes it's just the sound that follows when noise finally runs out of air. After the fallout from the fake expansion, Rachel disappeared from the office for a while. She claimed to be working remotely, but everyone knew that meant avoiding confrontation. Her desk stayed clean, computer untouched, and the inbox she once flooded with loud emails grew quiet. Meetings ran faster without interruptions. For the first time, Things moved smoothly without her shadow in every corner. Our father started calling me directly for updates instead of waiting for Rachel's summaries. At first he sounded hesitant, still adjusting to the change. Then it became routine. He'd ask about progress reports, client renewals, staffing plans, and I'd have the answers ready. It wasn't about replacing her, it was about finally being recognized as the person doing the work all along. Rachel noticed the shift even from afar. When our mother called one evening to talk about plans for her birthday dinner, Rachel made sure to emphasize she was busy closing deals from home. She still wanted to sound important, even as the company moved forward without her. At the dinner, she arrived dressed like she was attending a press conference. Every move was polished, every laugh carefully timed. She handed our mother a bouquet, then turned to me with a small wrapped box. Inside was a designer pen, engraved with the words "Own your signature." She smiled, waiting for a reaction. I just nodded and thanked her. She was expecting a reaction she didn't get, and that made her uncomfortable. Over the next week, I heard from 2 mutual acquaintances that Rachel had been venting about me. She told people I'd sabotaged her projects and made her look incompetent on purpose. The rumor spread quietly but didn't go far. Most people who worked with both of us already knew the truth. They'd seen enough of her chaos to draw their own conclusions. Then our father called both of us into his office. The air was heavy the moment we walked in. Rachel started first, describing everything as a miscommunication. She painted it as a family misunderstanding that outsiders exaggerated. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I placed a stack of printed emails, receipts, and signed forms on the desk. Every page had dates and signatures showing the trail of decisions leading back to her. There wasn't anything left to argue. Our father leaned back and said only that it was time to focus on rebuilding trust. Rachel's face tightened, but she didn't say a word. When the meeting ended, she left without looking at me. After that, she tried smaller ways to regain control. She began nitpicking my spreadsheets, searching for small formatting errors or decimal points slightly off. She'd forward them to our father with subject lines like important oversight. I fixed each one and sent back updated files, always with a clear audit trail showing accuracy. Her attempts fizzled out quickly. The real breaking point came during a client meeting. Rachel showed up unexpectedly, taking a seat beside me as if she still held her old position. When I presented logistics data for a new shipment schedule, she interrupted mid-sentence, questioning my numbers. The client looked confused and then corrected her himself, explaining he'd already verified those same numbers in our system. The silence afterward was heavier than any argument. By the end of the meeting, everyone was looking to me for direction. Rachel sat still, her notes untouched. Whatever authority she'd once had was gone. Not long after, accounting flagged an irregularity. A small vendor invoice linked to Rachel's credentials, something that didn't belong to any official project. It turned out she had been trying to start a side deal under the company's name, likely to prove she could still bring business. When the finance manager brought it to our father's attention, he didn't ask for explanations this time. He drafted a formal warning, signed it, and handed it to her personally. The notice was clear. Another breach would lead to suspension. That night, she sent me a long text filled with accusations about betrayal, family loyalty, and how I'd stolen her life. The message went on for paragraphs. I didn't read past the first line. I deleted it and turned my phone face down on the counter. The next morning, I filed the report from accounting into a new folder labeled Unforced Errors. I added a single sticky note that read, "No follow-ups." Rachel stopped showing up after that. Her name still sat on the staff roster, but her presence was gone. Meetings ran smoothly, clients signed faster, employees smiled more often. At home, my parents didn't bring her up much. My father focused on numbers. My mother stayed quiet, unsure which version of events to believe. But even she began to notice that peace seemed to return every time Rachel stepped away. The company wasn't perfect, but it was stable again. There was no shouting, no sudden creative initiatives, no emergency cleanups. The damage Rachel caused was repairable because the truth was visible now, written in numbers, dates, and actions. For years, I had protected her from consequences, thinking it would protect the family. Now, all it took was silence, documentation, and distance. Rachel's reflection was finally cracking, and for once, I didn't need to hold the mirror steady. With Rachel gone, the office settled into a rhythm it hadn't seen in years. Deadlines were met ahead of time, vendors responded faster, and the staff actually smiled during meetings. For the first time, the building felt like a workplace instead of a stage. I didn't have to triple-check every project or clean up behind anyone. The numbers spoke for themselves: steady growth, improved retention, and not a single client complaint in over a month. Our father started giving credit where it was due. During a Monday briefing, he thanked me in front of the entire department for stabilizing the company after a turbulent period. It wasn't a speech, just a statement, but it carried more meaning than any award. At home, though, things weren't as simple. My mother still called regularly, talking about how Rachel just needs time, and how it wasn't easy being the eldest with so much pressure. I didn't argue. She wanted to believe Rachel was finding her way back. I knew silence was safer than trying to convince her otherwise. 3 weeks passed before Rachel returned. She walked into the office one morning wearing a new suit, hairstyled perfectly, holding a stack of folders like a politician preparing for a press conference. The entire floor went quiet. She smiled at everyone, said she'd been reevaluating priorities, and announced she was ready to help lead again. Our father looked surprised but didn't stop her immediately. She requested a meeting to present a new proposal that afternoon, claiming she had secured an outside investor eager to help the company expand on a national level. The staff exchanged looks, unsure whether to treat it seriously or wait for another disaster. When she started her presentation, it looked impressive at first glance. Charts, timelines, and bold growth targets. The supposed investor was listed as a strategic partner with deep industry connections. But when I went through the documents afterward, small details jumped out. The partnership required our family company to take on personal liability for any losses. There were also penalty clauses that could bankrupt us if the investor withdrew. It was a trap disguised as ambition. I brought the paperwork to our father before the next meeting and pointed out the risks. He frowned, then told me to let Rachel explain herself. He wanted to give her a chance. During the follow-up meeting, he asked Rachel about the liability clauses. She brushed it off, claiming it was standard procedure and that I was overthinking things. When pressed, she accused me of being afraid of bold moves. Her confidence was rehearsed, just like before, but it didn't sound as convincing anymore. I didn't argue. Instead, I made a few calls that evening to an acquaintance in another logistics firm. Within hours, I learned that the same investor Rachel was promoting had been involved in multiple bankruptcies, each time leaving partner companies in debt. There were even court filings to prove it. The next morning, Rachel walked into the boardroom with her usual showmanship. She had invited department heads and even 2 external consultants to witness her big reveal. She handed out glossy pamphlets outlining her proposed deal. When she finished her pitch, our father turned to me for input. I placed a folder on the table and opened it. Inside were the official bankruptcy records and a list of ongoing fraud investigations tied to her investor. The silence that followed was long enough to hear the air conditioning hum. Rachel stared at the pages, trying to form an explanation, but the room had already shifted. Her assistant, who had been sitting in the corner taking notes, hesitated before speaking. He admitted quietly that I had warned them days earlier to verify the investor's credentials. That was the final crack. Our father closed the folder, thanked Rachel for her effort, and told her that effective immediately she was suspended for breach of trust. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Rachel stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, the echo of the door slamming, carrying down the hall. No one moved for a long time. When the room finally cleared, I noticed a picture frame on the floor, the company's founding photo, the one Rachel had once insisted hang behind her desk. The glass had cracked down the middle. I picked it up, straightened it, and placed it back on the shelf. The rest of the day moved quietly. Emails trickled in, meetings resumed, and life went on as if a storm had finally passed. That evening while driving home, I thought about how everything had unfolded. Rachel had built her entire world around being seen, and it collapsed the moment truth stood still long enough for everyone to notice. There were no public arguments, no shouting, no final showdown. Just evidence, silence, and consequences. 3 things she never thought could speak louder than her voice. The weeks after Rachel's suspension were quiet in a way the office had never known. No last-minute emergency meetings, no speeches about creativity, no confusion over who approved what. Work flowed naturally. Deliveries were on time, staff worked without fear of being blamed, and clients stopped calling with questions that used to stem from Rachel's overpromises. For the first time in years, the business felt steady. Our father kept his decision firm. Rachel wouldn't be reinstated until further notice. He didn't say it with anger, just finality. Our mother, on the other hand, tried to soften every silence. She brought up Rachel during family dinners, suggesting she was reevaluating herself and just needed a bit of compassion. I didn't argue. Experience had taught me that quiet was more persuasive than defense. At work, things improved fast. Departments that had once operated under stress now met goals ahead of schedule. Clients who had nearly left the company were returning, praising how smooth everything had become. Vendors that once demanded repeated clarifications now sent thank you notes for prompt coordination. I noticed small changes too. Employees who used to route everything through Rachel started approaching me directly. They didn't sound nervous or cautious anymore. They offered ideas, solutions, and even constructive feedback. I made sure credit went back to the teams instead of stopping at my desk. That shift, respect instead of fear, was what the company had needed all along. Meanwhile, Rachel's world outside the office started shrinking. Her social media posts slowed down. The flashy events she used to attend no longer tagged her. A few mutual acquaintances mentioned she'd lost several business collaborations. The image that had once carried her was fading, piece by piece. Then one afternoon, about 6 weeks later, she showed up. The lobby receptionist called to let me know Rachel had walked in unannounced. She was dressed sharply as always, heels clicking across the floor, greeting people like a politician visiting her old constituency. Most responded with polite nods, but no one rushed over. The applause she used to command was gone. She asked to meet, so I led her into the conference room. She commented on how organized everything looked, said the place seemed different in a good way, and mentioned that she'd been reflecting. Her tone was warm but rehearsed. Every sentence delivered with careful pauses like she'd practiced in the mirror. After a few minutes, she shifted to her real purpose. She said a competing firm had offered her a consulting position, one that would value her creativity and leadership. She smiled in that old expectant way, waiting for me to ask her to stay or show regret. I didn't. I told her if the offer felt right, she should take it. My tone was calm, even. The conversation ended there. Her smile faded, just slightly, before she nodded and stood. For the first time, she left a room without an audience to admire her exit. A few days later, an email arrived in the shared inbox addressed to our father and me. It was her resignation, short and formal. Thank you for the opportunity. I wish you continued success. No explanations, no drama, not even a signature flourish. Once it was official, I began reorganizing the structure she'd left behind. 2 employees Rachel had kept overshadowed were promoted into management roles. The departments they led thrived instantly. Weekly reports showed consistent growth, client satisfaction hit a record high, and for the first time, our annual projections exceeded expectations without inflated promises. Our father called me into his office one afternoon with the new quarterly results open on his screen. He didn't give a speech, just said quietly that he'd spent too many years mistaking volume for value. Our mother was there too. She didn't defend Rachel this time, she just listened, her hands folded, as if realizing how often her words had kept old illusions alive. Months later, I heard from a former coworker that Rachel's consulting deal had collapsed. The investor she'd joined had pulled funding within 3 months. She was freelancing now, working on small projects that rarely went anywhere. A few weeks after that, I saw her by chance at a cafe downtown. After hearing from a former coworker that her consulting project had collapsed, she was sitting alone at a corner table, phone in hand, scrolling like she was still looking for a stage. I walked past without stopping. She didn't look up. There was nothing left to fix or explain. Back at the office, the fiscal year was closing. I stayed late that evening to finish the company's annual report. The last line I wrote before saving it read, "Sustainability isn't built on noise, but on what remains after it fades." I reviewed the document once more, checked every number, and sent it off. No announcements, no press releases, just the quiet confirmation that the storm had finally passed, and the company, for the first time in years, was standing on solid ground.